right, setting up meeting.
It's out there now. Hey, everybody, we are on live. How is everyone doing this evening? I'm grateful to be here. We have had some technical difficulties. If you see two, it's really just one. Thank you for joining us for Real Talk, Real Life, Emotional Blackmail. We have Minister Delois Prince and Pastor Roger Russell joining us, and we are going to discuss what it is and what it means to be in a relationship or in relationship or around things that are emotional blackmail. The purpose for this platform is we're in quarantine and we are isolated in situations where we're unable to engage in normal activities. And within those normal activities, we are forced to deal with ourselves for the most time, for most of the time. If we live with other people, we are forced in a space, and some of those spaces are good, bad, ugly, or indifferent. If we are in spaces facing difficult circumstances and cannot communicate with an individual, it could be a place where it could be emotional blackmail. It could be a place where it could be abuse. But in this instance, and what the overarching platform of this is dealing with people who are emotional blackmailers. Why are we going to discuss this? Because so oftentimes people don't want to communicate or we try to give in to keep the peace. In cases of what I've seen in my past relationship, particularly one, I kept the peace. After this platform has concluded, you will have knowledge of if you are the one who has emotional blackmail behavior, being able to identify if you are in a relationship with someone who is an emotional blackmailer, solutions on how to change you or challenge yourself to address the person who has this behavior. Changing how you communicate, because no is an answer. And after all of this is over, I hope that I'm able to give you some things on how to respond, react, and continue forward with the individual differently. As I go into what an emotional blackmailer is and how they operate, let me give you a chance to understand why Delois Prince and Roger Russell, who's a pastor, came alongside of me. We needed some different perspectives. When we talk to women one on one, it's one perspective. So I additionally called Pastor Russell and said, can you come join us in this conversation? And with this conversation, we're going to talk about situations of emotional blackmailers who fear being alone. They guilt us into things or say it's all our fault. They use manipulation as the major driving force. They have a psyche of aggressiveness, passive, sometimes passive aggressive. They can be direct. They're extremely subtle and have a soft way of doing things. Some let us know that they will do it, and some act out if it's a physical abusive relationship. Some emphasize how they will make us suffer. Does this sound like someone you know? Is this you? Sounds like a spoiled brat, doesn't it? Well, it isn't. This is an acquired behavior. But before we get into our first topic, I'm going to allow Delois Prince and Pastor Roger Russell to introduce themselves. And after they introduce themselves, there's a series of questions after our first topic is introduced that I would like to ask. And as we go into this dialogue, and I will be a part of the dialogue, we're going to engage in probably 3 or 4 different relationships that we see today. So, Delois, tell us a little bit about you and about your ministry and how you're wanting to empower not just women, but the world as a whole with relationships and how they play a part in the Black church.
Good evening, everyone. As she said, my name is Reverend Delois Prince. I am the founder of Delois Prince Ministries International. You can find me on Facebook at Delois Prince Ministries International if you would like to follow my page. My ministry is geared towards women who are hurting mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally to help those women break those ties that bind. Most recently, I created a platform on Facebook called Sisters, Sisters Inspiring Sisters Through Excellence, Resilience, and Sisterhood. I created this platform as a way for sisters to support each other in ministry endeavors and in their business endeavors. I found myself missing on a lot of events that my fellow ministry sisters were participating or putting on. And so I said, why not create a platform where we can post all of these events? Within 48 hours, I had 100 sisters join my group. We're almost up to 200 sisters at this point. This past Friday, I hosted my first event. Reverend Yvonne was one of my guests on my panelists, and so I'm just really all about women supporting women, and then also helping women to realize their God-given potential.
I'm Roger Russell. Some know me as RR2. I'm in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where I serve as the senior pastor of Stone River Church. Here I am, first of all, elated and excited to be a part of this discussion tonight. You can follow me at the Stone River Church page or your Heart of the Matter page, where we have very provocative conversation and discussion that oftentimes is not discussed in church, but around church and Christianity and the culture. So you can find me there. I serve as one who's had to, I guess, matriculate in a church institutional space where young, gifted, and women are oftentimes excluded, as well as emotionally distorted in order to stay in power. So I think that's kind of the opening just of how and why I'm here at the table. But I'm excited to be here with these two wonderful women of God.
Thank you guys for coming and saying yes to something that's been in my heart for over 8 years. And I'm not going to get into my own testimony because it's not about me. It's not about us. It's about us reaching out and helping other people. So the first topic it's emotional blackmail, but our first sub underneath it is going to be fear. Fear is a verb to be afraid of someone or something as likely to be dangerous or painful. Fear is painful. In relationship with others, have you ever feared loss, change, or losing power with someone? Emotional blackmailers fear loss, change, rejection, and losing power. Delois and Roger, these are questions that both of you guys can answer one at a time. In a relationship with others, have you ever feared loss, change, or losing power with someone? Or have you ever been in a relationship where someone made you feel like you were going to lose them? They didn't want to change, or they felt like they were going to lose power with you. So vice versa.
Okay. Well, I'd have to say that I think most of us, if who have been in relationships, have probably felt at some point that we were going to lose power with a person or had a fear of actually losing that person. And I don't mean losing that person in the sense of the person dying, but losing the relationship. And I myself have found myself, I was in a relationship where I was afraid of losing that particular person. And I think sometimes that happens because, one, we're not honest with ourselves about the relationship and really where this relationship is going, if this relationship is beneficial to me. I think we get blinded sometimes by our feelings and our emotions. And once we get to that part, we have to um, come to grips, with the fact that, hey, this is not good for me. I'm afraid of losing this person, but, this person's not good for me anyway. So I'm afraid of losing this person. That might be the thing that I need to help me begin the healing process from being emotionally blackmailed in this particular relationship.
Pastor Russell.
I think I would more think about this question. I think I may need to share from two perspectives. I think I am with Reverend Delois as relates that all of us may have all been in part of some form of relationship where we've experienced the feeling of being emotionally blackmailed, or we have done or been on the other side of creating emotional blackmail. I think also, I have a unique perspective. I was talking from a church institutional space of being a young pastor, being gifted and young in a space that wasn't always very encouraging or inviting to the young group, whether it's preaching, pastoring, ministering, whatever that looks like. And so I think I've experienced it maybe in two settings, one in the relationship of the church, but also I think maybe as I consider the thought even deeper, even in relationship with people where you are, we minimize our ideas or thoughts that we maybe need to share so they can respect who we are in a relationship. And so we don't do it with fear that that person may walk away. So I think as we engage in this conversation, I'll be kind of speaking from two sides of it, from a pastoral leader, young and institutionalized church, and also from just being a male in different relationships.
It's kind of hard for you to be one-sided because you do sit on two sides of a scope, and it's hard for me to relinquish power when I'm always the person in the chair giving the advice. So this is kind of weird for all three of us, I think, because we're more givers than we are takers. And then when you are in relationship, you want to try to make it easy for the other person and not make it hard. So yes, we can be participants. And the reasons why I said it sounds like a spoiled brat, because I'm the youngest child. I'm my dad's only child, and I'm my mom's youngest child, and I'm my godmom's youngest child. I'm my spiritual mom's youngest child. And every time I would hang myself from a tree, they were there. Whereas even in relationships, I got my way. Beauty is a beast. I think you guys have heard that when we pre-did this questionnaire. Emotional blackmail can look like beauty, and you can get your way in so many ways without even saying anything. And then if you play the part, you will get an over an abundance of things, and then in the end it'll ruin you. So it can work both ways. So you guys kind of told me how you responded. Did you ever do anything in these relationships to just say, let's keep the peace? I always am a disruptor. I've been a disruptor probably since I wore diapers. And it's funny, but it's really true. I busted my head when I was in daycare, and I still have the stitch line here. And I remember falling off the swing, and I don't remember the pain. I busted my foot open. I remember the sore, but I don't remember the pain. So with a disruptor, you're kind of always getting into something. So people on the opposite end was wanting to keep the peace with me because the I would disrupt a birthday party in a lot of ways, beforehand. But I can't say that was emotional blackmail. That was just probably who I was until my mom was like, you just cannot keep acting like that. But in most pieces, when I'm at a place where I'm ready to settle down or be in this relationship, my youngest daughter's father, I would want to do things to keep the peace because I thought that was my forever. It would be upside down, and I'll say I'll give in, even with the various children in the relationship that came while we were together. I just felt like I owed him. So to keep the peace, you just kind of give in to say, hey, I'm just gonna do whatever it takes to make it work. And then when you look up, you just kind of wonder why. But then that takes some working too. So did you ever attempt to keep the peace and stay longer than you should? I can say, and I wanted to lead this way. I can say I stayed longer than I should because I was trying to keep some type of sanity for being a single mother with already 3 children. And let's try to make this a family with 4 with her dad. So did you stay just to keep the peace, or did the person stay with you to keep the peace?
I'll let you go first, Pastor Wilson.
All right. I think I guess in the personal side of being in a relationship, I think I was in the course of a long-term relationship with an individual, and I believe that I did early in that relationship, there was things that I felt were wrong or upset me, or I felt like wasn't right for me. And rather than, and two sides of that, because I didn't really at that age know how to articulate it well, to be able to express what was going on, how it was offending me and affecting me, that I didn't know how to express that. And so I think then I engaged in different behavior in order to try to heal myself from it, in the sense of, okay, let me isolate myself. Let me do this. So I'm not pained by this. But I stayed in it probably much longer than I should have, because you're in love, you have this idea of what love is. And so it created a space where I felt it, but I didn't know how to articulate well. And so then I just kept going along with it into a place where I think it ended up ruining what we could have had, and also distorting who we both were individually, as I look back over time. And from the institutionalized or the church perspective, I'm always operating this duality right here, right?
Let's not jump ahead, because that's our next question. Let's
Okay.
wait a minute, because that's gonna get good. We're gonna talk about the fear piece with that subject just right after
Yeah.
Reverend Delois. So this is good. This is good.
I would say that I did stay, not necessarily to keep the peace, because I wasn't the disruptor. I think there were times, but it wouldn't take much for there to be a disruption. Does that make sense? And I think I stayed more so out of love for the person, and the hope that, okay, well, we love each other. We can work this out. We can get this little patch. But you just kind of fooling yourself at that point, because you come to a realization where you realize that this is not going to work, and you keep going through the same cycle again and again. And at some point, you have to break the cycle.
I believe it. Breaking curses, as the old folk would say, it's not easy, because we saw those patterns, but we'll get into those patterns in our next segment, in our next section of this.
Reverend,
So
can I ask this question?
go ahead.
I think it's even, as I'm listening to Reverend Delois kind of even and discuss it, I think it's good to, I guess, lift it. Sometimes we don't even understand the subtleness of what that emotional blackmail looks like. I don't even know if I had the words to express that, what was occurring at that time. And I don't even know, even after the relationship, did I even understand that that's what occurred, until I had my own, I guess, as we continue to read and we become aware more of these therapeutic terms and processes, that then you start to look at your life with a rear view mirror, and you start to notice the spaces in your life, the individuals in your life, where you felt like the person, or maybe even you, were leaning heavily into a situation, or being leaned on about a personal situation, to realize, wow, I have been somewhat duped or manipulated or distorted. The truth has been distorted for me, and I get to see what they wanted me to see, not necessarily what's clear what I wanted, what I needed to understand. And I think out of that space of being now we understand is emotional blackmail, is that the relationship didn't even really seem bad until it affected other spaces of your life, until sometime even much later, then you have this kind of aha and enlightenment moment. We're like, wow, I'm messed up around these feelings, and I think it's maybe even the space where it paralyzes you, and you don't necessarily even have the ability to move on, or to what's next, or to how to detach from the relationship without feeling bruised or battered or torn and lost. I think sometimes you can be with somebody length of time, or even the strength of that emotion, that you feel lost without it. And I think that's another space that maybe, and we discussed what this emotional blackmail look like. And I'm hoping those who are listening are engaging in a rear view mirror perspective, looking back over their life, asking, where have there been spaces where I've been distorted, and how did it affect me, and did I become lost to who I am? Even though I'm walking myself every day, am I lost to who I am because of this?
Roger, I'm glad that you made that point, because so often when we do the inner work, we can realize that we were the enabler.
Yeah.
We were the person that
Mhm.
so not so much as allowed it, but we were fearful of being detached. As it said in the beginning, emotional blackmailers don't like to face fear.
No.
They hate change. They don't like rejection. And what I really found amazing is losing power for them was hard. Fear flourishes in dark places. We all know that. That's how depression evolves and all these other psychological disabilities come into play. And it never turns the light on. In reference to fear and power, and this is where we segue into something with fear, fear alone. In the Black church, can you identify the behavior of emotional blackmail? Have you experienced being the person? Because we're looking at two-sided coins. We can never go in and do the blame game. What I've learned as a pastoral counselor and what I hear a lot from my clients is they did this, they did that. There's a hat that we wear and we want to hang it. It feels better to hang the hat on the handle to show what someone else done. But we also played a part in it. And if I have to be the Jesus on the cross tonight, I will. Have I seen that behavior? Absolutely. Have I feared someone to love God? Absolutely. In my evangelical progressive days, I have used God is going to get you if you don't do such and such, but that's repeated behavior of what I've heard.
Yeah.
Being who I am today and the learning and the teachings, no, I wouldn't fear anybody to go to church. I wouldn't fear anyone to pay their tithes. What I would fear you into is to try to let go so you can become who you need to be. So the question again, in the Black church, Delois, this is for you first. Can you identify emotional blackmail behavior as it comes to fear? And have you ever been the evangelist or the reverend or the minister or the preacher that feared the member to stay, say you're going to hell or anything of that nature?
Well, first I would say no, that has not been me or my particular posture. But I believe the most classic example where we can find emotional blackmail in the church would be around money, particularly when it comes to tithes and offerings. And generally, the narrative goes if you are not paying your tithes, you're robbing God, you're cursed with a curse, and all of that. And to me, I understand that. I understand the reason for tithes, but I think at some point it becomes manipulation, and manipulation leads to emotional blackmail. And then the other instance where I've seen emotional blackmail in the church is when someone wants to leave your church or leave your ministry, and you say things to them like, well, we've done all this for you, we've done this for your family and this for your kids. That ministry opportunity that you're about to take is not of God, and they don't support what you know God is telling you to do, and they try to guilt you into staying because they feel like they're the only ones who can hear God on your behalf and what God wants you to do.
Pastor Russell,
Yes, ma'am.
this is where you come into play. As a pastor, can you identify the behavior? And have you experienced being the person in fearing someone to stay at your church?
I learned very early that you can't keep anybody anywhere. Now, I will tell you, I think it was the first person that I remember who had a major impact in ministry with me, but ended up leaving the church. I was hurt by it. I'll be honest, I was devastated. And I didn't know, because I had never experienced anybody leaving well from a pastoral space. But then I need to also tell you my personal space of everything that I think I fear the most in life, and even is still one of my natural traumas, is people that I love leaving. In my life, I was reared by a mother, a single parent mother, who had 5 children. My grandmother was in Alabama, but before that time, my grandmother who was here was really my godmother. And so to watch her physical demise and then her end of death, of everything I love left. It was my sister's father, what I call him, who was my stepfather. He died, and the very thing that I love, who I actually today emulate my manhood around, is him. And so he's the marker for me. But when he left and when he passed away, that was another person who I absolutely loved left. And so I wasn't many years beyond that as I became a pastor. Most people know I became a pastor at 24 years old. That last trauma was around.
Okay, Roger, he might have took a break or internet might have went out, but he'll come back. Um, Delois, we're going to use our subjects going into this. So if you said yes, you are the victim in the circumstance, the question would be how so? So we have 2 subjects with Helen and Jim. Jim is pressing Helen to move in, and Helen really loves Jim, but not ready to cohabitate. However, Jim insists Helen gives in. Joe uses the conflict of power and right wing by threatening to leave Helen. Helen regrets Jim moving in and is miserable. She has fallen victim to his emotional blackmail. All of that plays the part of losing power, being not wanting to be fearful, not wanting to live in fear or be alone, and then Helen giving in and allowing him to move in. Later on in that story, just to give you a little bit of what it said, she gave in and he moved in, and she regretted every bit of him moving in. Communication is key. Delois, what could have Helen done to stop him from moving in?
Well, I believe in a situation like that, I believe it's important that she communicate, one, how she feels about him, because I know she doesn't want him to feel rejected. And once she communicates how she feels about him, then communicate how she feels about this particular situation, about him wanting to move in, and tell him her reasons why she's not comfortable with that. And then he should hear her out as far as why she's not comfortable, and then they can come to a consensus, and he can hopefully understand her point of view about why this will make her uncomfortable and why this would not be the best decision for their relationship.
As I was reading that story and watch it all play out, the first thought was when he got angry and he said, "Well, I'm going to leave and I really want to stay." My first thought before reading on and into that story, I would have just decided to let him go. I don't know. The book doesn't tell us if they were in an intimate relationship. It doesn't tell us if they were all together, lovely, and you know staying more at his house or her house. I don't know it doesn't tell us what his financial stabilities was. It doesn't tell us a whole lot of things. So you would reason through it. Me being because you've been in relationships with your kid's father and you understand the value of marriage, where I on the opposite end have never been married. I'm quick to let go because of prior relationships. So I'm like, am I bringing baggage into this story? Have I healed from not wanting to let people go easily? What does all that mean? Roger. So I was giving Delois this story about Helen and Jim. Jim is pressing Helen to move in. Helen really loves Jim, but she doesn't want to cohabitate. Jim insists that Helen gives in. Joe uses the conflict of power. Remember at the beginning of the fear piece, when they don't want to be by themselves, they don't like, fear creeps in. They gotta have power. They're just disruptors. What I like to say spoiled brats, because I know my behavior when it used to wouldn't get his way. I was a little girl and I was a little tyrant sometimes. She had fallen victim to emotional blackmail. She gave in and he moved in. And the question is, because Delois just answered it, what could have Helen done to stop this or stop him from moving in? Because she ended up miserable. She really wanted him to move back out, but she was pretty much stuck in the middle of a full blown relationship that she did not want to participate in. What could she have done?
Before you answer that, can you finish what you were saying before you got booted off?
Technology was not my friend for the moment. I'm gonna answer all in both.
If you had seen us on StreamYard, you would have said, well, Yvonne and I should have been sisters and brothers. And I need to still be a brother or a sister to somebody after the first beginning of this when we try.
So
So, yeah, internet is not nobody's friend in this thing we call
You were talking
whatever's over
about
here. His
um,
dad.
the
yeah.
second trauma.
Yeah.
So I catch you with the second trauma for me, and as I talked about earlier, I had a person leave my ministry. She was very involved, a leader, really a cohort of mine. I mean, in that time at 24 years, I wasn't even dealing with the kind of an executive pastor, but she was very similar to that. She operated in that role. But anyway, in saying that, when she left, no conflict, no issue. She just felt like the Lord was tired leading her on somewhere else. And now she had some conflict inside of the church because people were struggling with her level of education, her level of expertise, and that she was Roger Russell's right hand, and we were getting things done together. And, people, when you upseat people in power in church, in a historical family-oriented church, it makes everybody uncomfortable. And that's kind of what the scenario was. So she ended up leaving. But what unbeknownst to the people, and even for me, I was struggling with my own understanding of trauma of people who I love leave. I had come to become very fond of her, and in a way, in ministry way of fond, like I love the person because we get things done, right? She was my ace boon coon in the hole. Whatever we start digging in, we dug it out. We got it done. And so for that person, it was a trauma because what I struggled as a young man with, as I told you, I was a single parent, part of a single parent. My mother had 5 children. My godmother was really my grandmother's role in my life. But many of my years, she became ill. She passed away. And I was struggling. But also because what I loved left. And then I had a stepfather who also passed away. And so he who I loved had left. I had built my life. And even today, I still say things to people, even to my mom today, that things he said to me, sometimes as jokes and some things that were principles in his life that he would share with us. And so he's my marker, or the person that I've modeled my manhood around. And so when those traumas relived, it became back to surface a pastor. It was a struggle because I was wondering, why is she leaving? Don't she love me, right? Why are you not staying with me in this ministry? We doing great together. Why are you leaving? And I was bothered about it. I mean, I prayed to the Lord. I was crying. Lord, we getting things done. I'm saying, like, she's my friend in ministry. Lord, there ain't no contention between us, but she's frustrated with some of the internal makeup of the congregational body. So it was a struggle. And I remember the voice of the Lord just telling me, you can't lose what don't belong to you. That's what happened. That's what I heard. So I'm getting the spiritual side. You can't lose what don't belong to you. And so it helped me get over, because I was ready to enact some emotional blackmail. Like, hey sis, where you going? We got things to do. Look, I'm there for you. You've been there for me. Let's get this thing going. But that's what prevented me from a pastor early on and accepting that you cannot use, as Reverend Delois was talking about earlier, those leverages from a leadership perspective. when you talk about pastoring, I think it's also good to note that I think it's been the history of the church and how we've been able to try to explain or interpret scripture that has injured or created this emotional blackmail. She talked about it for money, but I got some other ones. It's how we deal with divorce. It's how we deal with marriage from the husband narrative. When we talk about, a wife ought to obey your husband, all of these types of ideologies and we mishandle it because we engage in this kind of male dominant perspective in church. And so we use those things, whether it's male in marriage, whether it's a male from pastoral roles, and you talk about money, will a man rob God? And we go, we get to digging in that thing. But it's not until we're able to see an inclusive and a round panoramic view of ministry and how people are going to respond from injury or support that we can begin, I guess, to back out of as a pastoral leader from that emotional blackmail. And
but how can you help us with Helen and Jim? Because Jim did the same thing the church does. He guilted her into moving in.
I think so. You got to help Helen to find her own voice. If we're going to talk about that, she got to find her own voice, inclusive and then separate from him. Okay, so if Helen's going to engage in a relationship, she got to find her own voice in the relationship. But she also, before that can even be an act, she got to have a voice for herself. She got to self-identify and know what her principles are and live out her principles with practices that she can sleep with and be calm with and be nurtured by. Because I think that's one of the things, principles are standards by which we all live, but they're also spaces that nurture us. If we don't have principles in our own lives, we lose that nurturing factor. That's what God and church, the institutional ideas and beliefs factors become in our life. They nurture us to health or keep us healthy. It becomes the way by which we operate, we live, we conduct, emotional transactions. I always tell people we have emotional transactions with people daily. And she has to find that voice. And so if there's a Helen, listen, find your voice. You have to find your own personal voice and live in that space with or without a GM, right? And then if you find those places of principles, it's going to feed your life that you can be healthy in all spheres and you know who you are, you whole. Now, I drop you get me halfway excited. I gotta blow my hair down on my arm.
It's okay.
Because one of the things I always have tried to teach singles and singles ministry, whether male or females, is that you have to become a whole half if you're going to be engaged in relationship. And so to be able, once you are a whole half in all those spheres or spaces, then people can't manipulate you because you know who you are. You know your value, you know what you offer, you know what you can do, what you can't do, and then you also know your weaknesses. And so you can learn in a relationship, you can learn how to lean in to give strength, but you also know how to lean back in order to receive the strength. But it's dealing in that space of being a whole half. And I'm talking about psychologically, socially, financially, physically, sexually, and spiritually. All of those spheres, you got to be whole in those spaces before I believe you can engage in covenant relationship. And you can be companions with a whole lot of folks. And, grandma would call that shacking up, right?
They did. They cohabitated. So let me explain. You said a lot you didn't know. So both of you guys had no idea that Jim and Helen had this issue unless you read the beginning of the book. And I used that story as a segue to go into guilt. Because although he tricked her or feared her, he guilted her into it. So Jim was needy, in my opinion. So that's something that I see in a lot of relationships with men who are not financially stable and they want to have a comfortable place to live. They'll guilt you into letting them stay there and putting their, as my dad would say, putting their shoes under your bed, hanging their jeans in your closet, and before you know it, you're washing a full load of clothes. Jim was needy. Emotional blackmailers don't like to be alone. They fear and they're always angry. They're a parent. You said something, Pastor Roger. He said the parent or their immediate environment did not hold them responsible with this type of behavior. So they just succumb to it. It's like I was a spoiled child, very spoiled. Spoiled meaning there was always an arm for me to attach myself to. Whatever I practically asked for, I got it until I had a kid at 18. So a lot of giving came through my children to the point where I really didn't even have to work until I had my fourth baby, because my godparents and my mom and her husband enabled me to stay home. And while I was still doing what I wanted to do, they helped me a lot with my children. But with all that being said, whatever I asked for, I got it. I don't know if they saw the gift in me or they were trying to get me to grow, but it didn't help me be a better person. So emotional blackmailers can always lean in on a stronger vessel. I can't tell you that I leaned, but I can tell you I held my own to get what I needed. It wasn't so much as they were my support because I had my own place. It's just that they allowed me to live at home, raise my kids, while I really didn't have to do much financially for my children. But he was needy. But his parents enable that behavior. Parents create emotional blackmailers. And a lot of parents don't like to admit that it all started in the home. They'll blame, hang the hat, they'll blame it on a friend. They'll blame it on somebody else done it, or granny did it, or granddaddy did it. When in all actuality, this child lived with you. So he didn't get that confidence that he needed growing up as a man. So now he's needing her to enable him to continue on with this behavior. And just as soon as she gave in, like, a particular person that I know, women give in to him. And now he's 11 kids in the game. So these circumstances are real. So women give in to men like this, and it enables them to live comfortably. And they never go out to get their own, and they look up and they're 42 years old, still in need, still in want. They can't even make a half of a hole. And it's not to so much throw the dirt on that particular sore, but it's just to bring light that women stay in relationships like Helen did. You said Helen needed to own her voice. Well, in this case, the author of this book decided to use the role of the woman who was giving in to the man. So what she did was is she didn't face the elephant in the room. She decided to give in and let the elephant sit in the middle of the room, and he stayed in her life. And you look up and you're 30 years in a marriage wishing that your husband would leave, but you're too afraid to have that conversation. So you said a lot with not only your the people that you look up to and the woman that you didn't want to leave the church. And Reverend Delois said she reasoned in the relationship. And before you came in, what I was saying, Roger, is I've never been married. And I've learned to hold my own, even though my parents helped me. But when it's all said and done, there's a threshold that came, and you have to cut the ties eventually, especially if there's not a 3 carat on your finger. So Jim, we're not gonna get into that right now. We are on Facebook Live with that 3 carat on the finger.
We're gonna talk about 3 carat, but I would because you gave a view from the woman perspective. Right?
Mm-hmm, I did, because she gave it from a woman's perspective.
Right. So let me give it from the flip side, from the male.
Okay.
Side. I'm the only male on the.
I mean, we need you here because it would be all one side if it was just me and Reverend Delois. Ooh, what a conversation it would be.
one of the things I think also, as we talk about the unprepared male, in our context, let's talk about the unprepared black male, right?
Okay.
So I think it should be duly noted that the black male has had his struggles with being prepared because there was nothing in the home for him to view or mimic. We can talk about it from a wide range, from whether that's from the point of slavery, from the point of migration from south to north, as we're in the South today, and the male looking for work as he left the home, left the family, but he was sold into slavery to a different plantation, and we don't understand always the trauma that has happened to the black family, to the black fold, to the black mind of a black man,
Hannah,
and or the black woman that happened from that as well. So I think it's hard to be a man when a man is not present, right? I learned doing a man study at church, men who were 60, 70 years old, who were still struggling at masculinity because they didn't have anybody in their life to mimic and to know. So simple things about changing a tire, simple things about, managing a bank account or budget. They just didn't know because their mothers did it. And, sons and mothers don't always have those open conversations. And mothers tend to nurture sons very well, but not necessarily have the skill set to prepare them for all the arenas of what that looks like. She can give him up to a par, but to advance him, I'm not sure that a woman can advance him in the spaces that he needs to be advanced is to be a strong male person, ready for marriage, ready for relationships, ready to step in those spaces, especially if he didn't have one. And so,
over nurturing is a symptom for creating emotional blackmailers.
Yeah.
I was a spoiled brat, remember?
Yeah.
And I was a tyrant, and I got my way a lot of times. And because I'm the baby of all women and my dad's only child, I was actually coddled. Oh, and I'm using this as transparent as I can because I'm not that girl who will go into the room. So I'll blame you when it's the truth, but I like to take both sides when I played a part in it.
Right. Well, that's why I wanted to drop that, because I think sometimes when we see
coddling.
But think about when we see the black male being an emotional blackmailer, we don't understand that that's a cause and an effect. We see the effect, we would always want to talk about or discuss the cause. And that's what you were sharing about, that there's something that has occurred in the life of the emotional blackmailer. And so I just thought it's good to say from a black male perspective that when we over nurture our sons, we create a space for them that they have to then continue to use that in order to have their natural resources met, because they don't know how to go out and get a job. They don't know how to apply for this. They don't. And so when there's a lot of don'ts, you still got to survive. And so they kick into survival mode, and this shows up as emotional blackmailing.
It is.
And so can I add something?
Go ahead, Reverend. Go ahead.
Because I was having a conversation, I think it was last Friday, we were on the same live, and we were talking about how Black sons are nurtured, but Black girls are raised.
Very much so. Oh, good. Can I virtually high five you? That's a good one. That. I totally agree.
And I have my own personal experience with that, because I met someone, they were their mother's only child, and mother did everything like for them. Like, I mean, this person was grown. Mother would make their doctor's appointments for them. They call and remind them about the appointments. They were on the mother's insurance. They never had a checkbook. Never didn't know how to write a check or anything like that. Now they had a father, but the father wasn't.
So I think Delois may have some technical difficulties. Maybe when she comes back on, she can finish the story. I believe that there's some things going on with the internet service that's overloaded. I don't know if it's virtual school. I don't know if somebody's having this big hip hop program, but the internet is not our friend tonight. But she'll come back. We're gonna go into this thing called. I think Delois, you want to finish your story?
Can y'all hear me?
We can. Go ahead.
They didn't know how to do anything, and when they got out into the real world, it was just a train wreck. And their mother still, I mean, even to this day, I mean, they're married now, but it's still like it's kind of like she still tries to like, I guess, still nurture him. And he like 41 now at this point in his life.
I think one of the, I mean, you're nailing it. We talk about what that looks like from young black boys to black men. I always try, even friends I have, and we be talking, and their mother, they're talking about their sons, and I always say my baby, and I keep telling them, no, you can't. You know, at some point, you got to stop using that term, or it becomes a mental imprint on their mind. And so, because it's an imprint in their mind, they still need and start desiring the same thing that a baby would. I need you to care for me and do this for me and do this. And so they never move from childhood to adulthood. And so it's that term of delayed adolescence, right? You know, they have all that, they're chronologically a man, but their thinking, their behaviors, their habits are all in the form of still being in adolescence, and they still need support and all these different things. And that's not to say that the mother didn't intend to be loved. It's just this is the cause and the effect when we over nurture our sons, and as the Reverend Delois said, but we raise our daughters. I mean, it has been a survey. You can look it up on Google. African American women are the most educated sector in America, right? They are thriving, and they are being amazing in all type of spaces, and we're still struggling to get black men up to par, right? So you're right. And I think that comes by, and I've been on a lot of these panels and single and love panels and all types. I've been on 90,000 panels in my lifetime. But one of the things that I've learned in listening and being a part of those discussions is that most of the time, because our homes have been led by African-American women, is that they always raise their daughters to be the woman that they wish they could have been or should have been, or to empower them in a space to say, look, this is where I obtained, but you got to go beyond, even if that's a high space. But our sons, they just look and say, well, your dad wasn't here. And so we coddle them and we over nurture them. And then it creates them to be a space where they never really fully mature, right? And so they need that woman, as Reverend Yvonne said a little while ago, he need a place to put his shoes under a bed, right? And so that happens. But
And
those,
Helen has to raise, at some point, Helen or Jim is going to have to figure out which piece of this are they going to go inquire about a mental health therapist, because it all leaves trauma in the end.
right,
When you look at the overarching, you need some type of mental health specialist. Emotional blackmailers use guilt. They will guilt you into staying longer than you should.
yeah,
There is nothing wrong with guilt, and it's an essential part of being, a feeling of being responsible. Guilt helps you to keep your moral compass working. You know, you can do something bad and feel guilty about it, and then you try to fix it. We trust guilt because we feel like we stepped out of bounds and do something that will hurt another. We hold ourselves, guilt should allow us to hold ourselves accountable. This is healthy guilt. On the other hand, emotional blackmailers use undeserved guilt. Remember when I said the blame game? It's always your fault. We have been in relationships, marriage, single, with our kids when they say it's all your fault. You're blaming me for everything that is really your fault. Emotional blackmailers love to say, I didn't do it. In most cases, they're not able to see themselves in their relationship as it being their fault. They love to say, why didn't you go to the store when they roll past the store? Why isn't there a light bulb in the bathroom when the light bulb is under the sink and you can change it? So they never want to take ownership of something that they could have done on their own. Emotional blackmailers are found, as we have said, in the Black church. And this is where we're going to segue into heavily into the religious space. Even if you're in a relationship and you're the first lady of the church or the pastor of the church, or you're married to the deacon, or you're married to the minister, has the Black church pulled you in as a leader and held you accountable for something they should keep themselves responsible to? Let me ask that again. Has the Black church pulled you in as a leader and held you accountable for something that they can do themselves? Therefore, when all hell hits the fan, it becomes all your fault. We've heard a lot about relationships. We've talked a little about the Black church, but has the Black church held you at hostage and blamed you for something that they can do for themselves? Have they put you out of a church because of your ministry and then look back and say you were a part of it falling apart? Has the Black church held you accountable for the split of a church, when in all actuality it was something that they should have done in the beginning in order to mend the church back together again before they put this new entity in place? I can truly tell you today publicly, I've been held responsible for what happened in 2 Black churches. Fully responsible, told that it was my fault when it was something that you may have should have done in the beginning. It takes 2 to play the game, but it takes 1 to lay the guilt. You hear the story, and it has a lot to do with the platform. You have the voice to raise, like Helen, you said she should have had a voice. You have a platform, so you get to go before the layperson to give claim to what's really your fault. So again, has the Black church held you responsible for something that they should have done themselves? And they say it's all your fault. Yes or no? You can give me a scenario. You can explain how they manipulated you, because that's where we're leading into, and guilted you to stay because of what they don't want in it, or they're afraid you're going to say something. So they say, well, if you leave, it's going to be your fault that everybody else leaves. I've heard that on several occasions. You're the anointed one, you stay here and everybody else will stay. Just those that's a hard question to answer when you're attached to a building. For me, I'm Single Moms Inspired for Life Extreme, so I'm more candid in that area to discuss what has happened. But it's good that I was able to experience those things, so going forward I'll know how to approach it. And I can't tell you that you haven't faced it. I can say you may not want to talk about it, but let's grapple with that one right there, because there's a lot of people who are being blamed for things in the Black church, or they're being guilted into staying when they really just want to leave.
So, what I will share, it wasn't an instance of where someone was being guilted into staying, but rather an incident where they made to feel like they were the blame for their marriage falling apart, because you had a couple who were a part of a particular church, and both of them called into ministry. The wife, she has not gone to seminary. The husband had gone to seminary. Couple starts having marital issues, and they make church leadership aware of said issues. However, instead of helping couple with said issues, they license, ordain, and give the husband a paid position in the church. Meanwhile, on the flip side, they will not allow the wife to move forward in ministry because, in their words, they did not want her to get up there and perpetuate a lie. So them holding her back made her feel like she was being punished because she felt like it was her fault and that she was being punished by them not letting her move forward in ministry. When in truth, she had been called before her husband, but she had they had children, not long after they got married. And so, she was at home taking care of the children. She allowed him to go to seminary and obtain his degree. And then now they're having issues. And he's the one that is guilty of infidelity. But they allow him to move forward in ministry, but did not allow her to move forward. And so she felt like their marriage falling apart was her fault and that she was being punished for that.
So it's kind of like a self-mutilation thing. It wasn't so much as they blamed or said it's all your fault. It's more so I'm blaming myself for what had happened.
No, she said that she felt like they blame, even though they didn't explicitly say it, but she felt like she was to blame. Does that make sense?
It does, but that comes with a lot to do with self-esteem. It has a lot to do with owning who she is as a woman, regardless of seminary or position. It goes with what Pastor Roger Russell said. Helen needs a voice. It goes with sometimes you have to be Yvonne. Today somebody commented, I think your friend Donna said, "You sure on the road today, sis?" I said, "I've always been outspoken. I just now know how to use my words." So we have to help. This whole overarching segment is to give strength to Black women and Black men, because Black men are in emotional blackmailing situations with women who have kids that don't want to go to work when they need to. So there's a lot of things going on in that with relationships that need to heal in men. And if she still feels like that she's guilty of the relationship going apart because of what somebody else's decision was, that's something that she may need to go and talk about or work through. Because in all honesty, I thought it was my fault that my daughter's father kept having kids in our relationship. I thought it was something that I wasn't doing that was good enough, because I'm giving in to what you asking me for, and I can't see my worth.
I drop in there. I think it's a good space to note whether it's a female or a male.
Yes.
In a relationship that is injuring you, that you have to be able to discern the difference between companionship and covenant relationship. And oftentimes we think the longer we're in a relationship that this is the person we're supposed to be with, and we think that becomes our covenant. And I believe that you have to get to a space where you can recognize that some people are just, you engage with the relationship and your companion and you learn something from, that you may be able to take that seed and to plant that tree in a covenant space. Everybody that you date or come in contact with or go out with or sliding somebody, since we modern, we slide in the DMs all the time.
You can slide on, Pastor Russell. Slide on.
If you slide in it, everybody's not meant to be your covenant. You can learn some unique things in a short period of time, or sometimes it can take a long space of time to learn something from that individual. But you can take that seed and go forward and enter into a covenant space and be and raise the level of your standard, right? The consciousness of what excellence looks like in a relationship, and live to those principles we talked about earlier, where your principle becomes healthy for you. Now, if you don't mind, that church piece that you talked about.
You can't pass it up. That you got to answer the question.
So here's my.
If you can give a scenario of something that you may have experienced, or if you don't feel comfortable, I understand your place on this platform. I promise I do. But if you don't feel comfortable answering the question, can you answer, since we're on the topic about relationships, have you ever found yourself dating someone like your parent?
I want to back up to this church thing.
Okay, well, we can go back.
I got to get back to this institutionalized church now.
But we can't pull away from the part of So the church, we all know, we've all congregated in the Black church.
Mhm.
We've all had our experiences in the Black church.
Right.
And we know that there's platforms that Black women don't have, where Black men that are pastors, deacons, ministers, bishops, and they have a voice over ours. And they have a stronghold of giving what Reverend Delois shared, a title over the other person. Or you
But your
sit.
question was,
The question is, have they ever made something as if it was your fault?
Let me just drop my 18 years of pastoring right in the midst of
Go
it.
ahead.
Right. I think that does happen, and whether it's male or female in leadership.
Yeah, it's no gender at
Right.
all. Trust me, it ain't no gender.
Yeah, in that space, in my experience as a young preacher and a young pastor at a church, I tell people, and when I try to explain this, because I'm actually writing a book about this perspective, it'll come out a little later on, I say that, but I'm writing from my perspective of sitting in the seat of the pastor as a 24-year-old son. I always say there was times in my leadership, especially as a young man, that I had older deacons, had older leaders, that I could see them as my parents. When I talked to them, I could see them having conversations with me from them as a parent to a son, from a leadership perspective to a pastor, me as the pastor. Sometimes it was grandparent to son because of the age gap was so wide. And so when you talk about guilting, look, I got about 10 things we could talk about from that perspective. That the issue for me was oftentimes I was engaged in a church that the people in leadership was twice my age, and sometimes close to 3 times my age as a leader. And so my rearing and how my mother raised me played a part of my pastorate. That was things that I knew was absolutely false and wrong that we were doing, needed to be changed, but I didn't have the voice yet to share with them, let's stop it, because in my world of being raised, there's some things you don't say to senior elders, senior adults in your life. And so I had that happened a lot. And then the model of the Black church. Most Black churches live in the modelship of leadership of one person. And so the pastor easily becomes the scapegoat when something don't go wrong. So I'm just saying from my perspective, right, as pastor, young pastor.
That's the word, that scapegoat. That's the word.
You become the scapegoat because we live in a model, most churches are led by one single leader versus communal leadership, right? And multiple spaces of leadership at the table. I came from a city background into a rural community to pastor a church. We were as different as night and day, as oil and water. How we understood church, our experiences in church, our communities were different. It was still agricultural / into new part of industrial living. I came from a city place where corporate America and it was the way of choice of most people in our community. So I didn't even know about factories until I moved to Murfreesboro. So you're talking about just when two worlds collide and meet, is that most people don't see that. So pastors and leaders do become scapegoats. A family-led church or family group churches. When you go into rural churches, most churches are family-led, right? It's 2 or 3 church families that dominate the church. So then you have to work to become trusted. You got to deal with the tenureship of people who've been there and their ownership of the church and their mindset because we're tenured. So when you're talking about feeling like being their scapegoat or being blamed, it's all of that. It's the tenure of people in church. It is their understanding that tenure creates power for them. I've been here. Who are you? Position is not power in the rural church.
Well, let me share this with you, Pastor Russell. The behavior trait is something like control of power. When they tell you that it's all your fault or blame you for something that they need to take ownership on.
Right.
And most people that need to hold responsibility for themselves are easy to lay the head. Emotional blackmailers hate to lose. They will never own their wrongs. You said a lot in that whole, they don't like to lose. They don't like to know that they're wrong. And they do not have healthy conversations to dissolve it.
I'll introduce this too. I think it's something to note is that I think sometimes emotional blackmailers also are born because of educational deficiencies.
Well, I'm not an expert on education deficiencies because when I become this licensed therapist, it's going to deal more so on psychotherapy and how to deal with the core. So if education deficiencies come in, you will find that in their language. You
Yeah.
will find that in their lacking abilities of not being able to read. But we have to go back to the overarching core. So dealing with the inside and trying to face the elephant in a room, you have to cut the elephant down a little bit at a time. But at the end of the day, you have to get to why am I this way? A congregation can coddle a pastor or a leader in the church, and they don't hold them accountable. Therefore, it's easy for them to place the blame or guilt other people of other things. And it's not even just the pastor, it's so much of how the Black church is created. The Black church is the Black church is created from a 1619 model. And from that model, the slave owner manipulated them even from the slave Bible that we all know. And they ripped out pages where they didn't see freedom. So that alone was already stirred up in that. Not to save the Black church and not to lay any weight on what the Black church can't do, because the Black church has saved a lot of our lives. But what we're trying to see is how to help women and men who stir up in those spaces and heal from the hurts that have happened. Because when you start talking about emotional blackmail, what we have to understand is it opens up every entity, corporate where you work, there's a story where there's a guy in the book who dated a girl who he was married and she worked for him and they became intimate, and he told her he was getting a divorce. And when she was ready to quit and leave, he threatened her to lose her job. And she was in a well-to-do executive position because she didn't no longer want to stay in a relationship because he never made due on his contract. So he had the power over her to fire her. Well, her friend said, don't do it. Wait till he this is a real story in the book. Leave him. Don't date him. It's not going to work out in your good. But she ended up getting the last end of the straw. So power has a lot to do with emotional blackmail. When you start talking about emotional blackmail, they have a core of it'll never work. I'll never get what I want. Most times emotional blackmailers get everything that they can touch in life, but they can never have what they want, and it's still not enough. I don't know if I can stand it. So they can walk away from situations because they're more on the privileged end. Overall, and I was looking up statistics, but I could not find the correct numbers to find a balance in male and female, because it kept weighing on women than it did men. Because if you notice, America is more weighted on men in power. With this emotional blackmail, men have more control over women when it comes to positions of power, especially Black women, who are the most disrespected women in the whole wide world. As an example, a man who's in power can have 12 children and still be respected, but she can't have 4 and be a single mom, create the business or the nonprofit, and get the respect that she needs with the integrity that comes to the table. In Suzanne's book, that is a true story about that woman getting fired because she didn't give in after she realized that he was lying. And because he's the executor of the company and she held a semi-executive position, she was fired. And that's what we don't see. And like you said in the beginning, we don't notice that we are in those type of relationships until after the fact. And we look at the rearview mirror and we learn from them. So it takes some growing. So how can we help the Black church?
Yvonne.
What?
I know you're plowing through.
No, I'm getting ready to go into it. Listen.
No, hold on.
I know, and you want to plow too. So give me a minute.
I got some people raising questions.
Did you finish answering the other question? I don't think I got a chance to.
He did. You had cut off.
No.
let's plow on through to we're gonna so there for all of this, there's solutions. Trust me. Roger, you probably just as bad as I am because it's interesting to know what's coming.
No, I'm saying there's people asking questions on the live feed.
Oh, I can't see the questions. Give me a
I'm trying to help you. Let me pause you.
That's fine. They can
most of the people on our Black church, so questions raised. Could it be that pastors and leaders are held accountable privately rather than publicly?
I can't say that. I can say if we go back and do the study of the emotional blackmailer, that's a behavior trait. And that takes working through psychiatry and therapy. A lot of what we have on the inside of us growing up, we don't know we have it until someone points it out and holds us accountable. And if you get more than 3 people saying that this is wrong with you, then it's probably something wrong with you. And then you have to go do some workings. Now, if you continue to deny that behavior, then that's something else. So the Black church will hold the leader accountable. They will hold them accountable even in their wrong for the most part. So that's a behavior. And some behavior can only be worked through therapy. Without therapy, you can't preach a behavior. You can't preach behavior change. Like you said, you can't make people stay. I can't tell people they're going to go to hell if they don't go to church. So there's a thing called morals, godly morals. Not perfect morals, but just having morals and being ethical. There's a thing called mental health therapy. Suzanne is a PhD in mental health. Behavior cannot be changed by just holding somebody accountable. That's a trait that they have that has to be worked out of them. Is it another question?
So that question was about, are we holding leaders accountable publicly or privately?
It said, could it be that we hold Black churches hold leaders accountable privately versus publicly? And
they hold them accountable privately, and they don't hold them accountable to go see a mental health therapist.
I think a lot of it now, these days, a lot of these things are playing out in the public.
Yeah. Because we on live.
A lot of these scandals, but I think when it still comes to some other things, they're still being swept under the rug. Like and I don't want to. I mean, this is a public platform, so be careful what I share. But yeah, but for the most, but even back when how they would blackmail women, and I would call it emotional blackmail. How if you had a child, out of wedlock, what they make you do?
Go to the church.
Go to the front of church. Ask the church for forgiveness for your sins. Was the baby daddy up there? How many times you see the baby daddy up there?
Never witnessed that. And I've been in church since I was 4. So my mother's protected me. So I'm going to tell y'all once again, I was caught really bad.
So let me tell you, I take that same scenario. That happened to me my second year of pastoring at 25 and a half, 6 years old. Young lady of the church was pregnant. She was a part of our ministry, doing great work. I mean, literally doing great ministry work. And that's what they wanted me to do. They wanted me to take her from the church, but I couldn't do it in good faith as a prayer. And my thought was this, because that was the tradition. You bring the woman from the church and say she's pregnant, she needs to beg the church for pardon and all these different things. And we never brought the young man, or those things never happened. But here was my thing: if she understood and her understanding of disobedience, she asked for forgiveness in private. What was the need to bring up things publicly in front of the whole congregation? I just didn't understand to give her this scarlet letter P because she had sex out of wedlock and I kind of said, but let's be honest, there's nothing new to this perspective I'm going to drop. But if you need some survey, go to the Pew survey. 88% of all believers unmarried are having sex. It says 88%, not 8, not 18, not 28, 88% of all unmarried people in church who claim Christ as their Lord and Savior and Christendom is having sex.
But we can't get off the subject of emotional blackmail. As much as I want to talk about sex in the black church, now if y'all want to come
It's
back and do
emotional
another,
blackmail, Yvonne. That's emotional
we
blackmail. That's
can't talk. But
It is
in this,
emotional blackmail because what do they tell the young women in
yes.
the church? Keep
I
your
know,
legs
but we have
closed.
to. I get
Keep
it.
your legs closed. They're not emotional blackmail, but
But if
they
you don't
don't
get,
tell the young men to keep their pants zipped up.
I understand that, and it's not to
And
be. It's not
we
to
have a
pull.
we
It's
have
not
an
to.
unworkable. Let me just jump. I'm
I
jumping in.
got some rebellious students on here.
We got
Let
some
them talk.
unworkable theologies. And so you talk about how the church creates this emotional blackmail. That's
Listen,
one of the ways.
I get it. I get
And
it.
they use it to injure people.
And the tide has gotten high, and I understand that the water's coming to the sand. I
He's
feel it.
never worked in ministry since.
My feet are wet, but there's a thing. So this is, as a pastoral counselor, there's a grace and a mercy. And the grace and the mercy says, if you don't unchain the demon in Mark 5, the demon never leaves. If you don't sit and talk to the demon to give it what it needs, the demon never leaves. If you don't take the work that needs to be done, which can be done within the hour and however many minutes we've been on, and tell it first takes that you have to admit that there is a problem. Yes, we can sweep it under the rug. We can tell other people not to say anything. We can bring the sister to the altar and make her feel bad because that's traumatic too. So you only add insult to injury. Not only does the leader need to go get emotional blackmail help, she now needs to go see a therapist about being traumatically shamed in front of the black church. So, yes, we're going to work through that on another platform. But one thing that I do understand, healing is a process. And emotional blackmail with healing is a process because we still have black women out here who use their beauty to seduce men. And we have black men out here who use their power to seduce women. So it works two in the same. It takes two to tango, and manipulation plays a strong piece in why we stay longer than we should. You go in destitute into a relationship, be it male or female. We can't just talk about the black man and not add the black woman in too. You have no money. He has all this power, and you take this relationship on. So you use your charm and your charisma. The people in power have all they want and still want more. They are overprotected by people and they are not held accountable. They don't handle loss well and they make mountains out of molehills. They don't go get help. But how can we help them find the solution? How do we help Jim, who could be the person dealing with emotional blackmail or being the aggressor who is the emotional blackmailer? How can we help Helen? Pastor Russell said it best. I'm not easy to reason when I see disgruntled people in relationships that are opposite sex. So if I see something that I don't agree with, I now tend to back walk out of it because I'm like, the red flags are there, the signs are there. You have to use your voice. And you have to be able to identify when that behavior trait comes because what happens is you see it, but you don't do anything about it. In the black church, we go in, we enjoy the service, we see the red flags, but yet we say nothing. So when do you hold people accountable? When do you share with them in a quiet way and say, baby, maybe I need to give you this business card to go visit somebody because I see this behavior coming in and out your front door. It could be your house door. It could be your car door. It could be your church door. It could be, somebody paying your tuition because you let them see, people have feet fetishes. That's manipulation. It could be an overarching of things, but when do you heal from the inside to change the behavior? Because Helen's dealing with some things too because she's giving in. And Jim is constantly being needy. Do we decide to stay or do we decide to leave? What's the process? The process is getting a therapist. And if you can't afford one, there's 1,001 self-help books that will help you see who you are. The last thing an emotional blackmailer wants to see is who they are. And they're not candid in sharing their story. They like to run around the fence and through the gate to tell somebody else's story. As for me and the workings that I've had to do through the years of being in my wilderness season, even with seeing a therapist every 2 weeks and having to deal with different personalities, I'm able now to say there's a side to this that I played too. We all played both sides. We either enabled it or we were that person. But when it comes to the power from the pulpit and the Black church, that appears to be the hardest mantle to break, because we as a church member, me too, are a part of families, or we're inside the game and we allow it. We see it in our leader, but we don't call it out. But when we call it out, it becomes our fault. And I'm using me again as the Jesus on the cross. I'm the person that'll call it out or say something. Then I'm in turn, oh, it's your fault. How? Because I called something out that I saw you need to get work on? How? When this is a private conversation and no one knows about it?
I'm raising my question, Yvonne.
Go ahead.
Part of this, when you, and I think Delois and I both are trying to give scenarios about what that looks like to be, where the church is in error, people in error, and how we call out one another, vice versa, right? Holding people
in private.
Right now, I think there's some things we have to admit. We're talking about Black church, and we're Christians. We're talking about these emotional blackmail. We're talking about it from a therapist and perspective. There are spaces where you have to be discreet when you hold them accountable, right? All accountability does not have to be flagged out in parade, you know. So some things you can hold people accountable in the background when it is a genuine error, right? I made a mistake. You made a mistake. It's a genuine error. But when it becomes gross behavior, that's a difference. And so you got to hold people accountable a different way when it's gross behavior, when you sit in the seat of power. When you talk about whether it's a ministerial or counselor, whatever it may be, or leader at work, wherever that may be, a parent, a husband, a spouse, you know, whatever it is. When it's a actual, I did it, but it was a mistake, it's one off, you can hold somebody accountable in a very discreet way to give space for development and growth.
You're coming from a church perspective?
I'm talking about all. I'm talking about any and all.
So emotional blackmail is a behavior trait that it's going to happen again. Unless it's worked on, it's going to happen again.
Wait a minute, sister. We've already said that emotional blackmail is produced by a personal trauma in their life.
Yeah.
And so they're only going to
it's produced by being coddled and being not held accountable.
It still creates a trauma space where it needs to be formed. It doesn't matter what word we use. It's still a space where that person needs to be developed in. And so if that person is underdeveloped and they have these behaviors and traits, and I come to you, let's just say me and Sister Delois in a relationship, and I'm underdeveloped, I generally offend her, but it is because I know no better, right? And she calls me out on it privately and say, hey, Russ, you can't treat me, do me, talk to me, whatever this way, and I have corrective behavior, then the discretion work. But if she holds me accountable in private and I continue to offend her privately and publicly over and over again, then I believe the person must be brought to the table publicly, right?
Publicly, and then so help me.
It could be a lot of different forms. It could be held accountable, like you said, through counseling. She may say to me, hey, look, baby, me and you talking about it can't work. We must get a third party in, a mediator, a counselor, a therapist, someone to talk about why is this continue to happen in your life, why you see the behaviors creating this type of effect, and if these effects keep happening, you can't seem to get beyond making a different decision, you need somebody to come in and deal with the trauma of your mind, right? There's a bruised place that is short-circuiting and you can't get past the breakage.
It's not short-circuited, it's your gray matter So it's gray matter in our mind that's entangled, and it does not process like a regular brain does. So
Right.
therefore, when it acts out in a certain way, it doesn't know how to respond. It uses different techniques to get what it wants. And the only way you can identify it, you would have to sit and observe it. So there, the solution behind one of those identifiers, if you are in a relationship like that, it's best to be quiet and take notes and observe it, because oftentimes you can't see something when you are wearing rose colored glasses. But if you keep feeling this type of behavior coming at you, you have to sit and really look at that situation. But Pastor Russell, this is what I'm trying to help you understand from a pastoral counselor seat and understanding a lot about psychology of behavior. When you see a pattern, when you see a situation evolve, I was a tyrant. I was spoiled. I got what I wanted. And I tried that in my adult life, and it got me in trouble. But there were some things that needed to be handled within my life. Now, my mate could have seen it once, but you ask yourself, this is helpful people that are listening. How many times have you did this one thing? Because when you do one thing, you've done that thing before. Not one thing doesn't happen sporadically. One thing has happened before. The door just wasn't open wide enough for that one thing to occur. Normally, when behavior speaks out loud, it's happened before. You said, pull them to the side, let's talk about it. But 98% of the time, it's happened before. 99.9% of the time, it's going to happen again. Yes, you do give grace and mercy for the second time. So we are still going to grapple with, when do you stay or when do you leave? Do you wait until it's 20 years down the road, you're in leadership, uh, in the relationship, cohabitating in the relationship? How long do you allow this to continue on until you say, I've had enough, but then this person still hadn't been checked? When talking to my clients, the first thing I ask them is, what do you love the most? And when you find out what they love the most, you can find where the hurt began. But one behavior does not just happen once in a relationship. They've done it before they met you. It's just a new person meeting who I am, and I'm going to try it on this next one because I didn't fix it's like carrying over emotional baggage. Y'all heard that before. That's a layman's term that I can use.
Yeah, and I think because a lot of times they haven't been called to the carpet on their behavior, and that's why they continue to repeat the same behavior, because no one is holding them accountable. And then you ask a question, how long do you stay? Well, if it's a relationship and I'm not married to you, you're not married to me, we can go our separate little merry ways. But if we are married and there is no physical abuse, then I feel like some counseling needs to be sought on that person's part, and then together, because if you are allowing yourself to be emotionally blackmailed, maybe there is some trauma that you have not
Talk, Reverend.
you
I'll
have
you
not
with that. You walk right
dealt
down that. Yeah.
dealt with yourself.
Yeah.
And I believe that at some point in our lives, or we all had the tendency to, to be emotional blackmailers. And I think some people use it sometimes to,
Get what they want.
to get their way. I remember you asked a question about, have you ever dated like your parent? And I'm not gonna say which one, but I would have to say, yeah, I did, because I didn't want anybody like my other parent, because I was too much like the parent. But I mean, I think the whole thing is just, it's just an interesting dynamic. And then when bringing in the church aspect of it and looking at how the church perpetuates emotional blackmail, I think one other thing that could be useful, particularly in the church, is teaching emotional intelligence. Um, I think all pastors and leaders should take a course on emotional intelligence. I'm fortunate to work for a company where we have those kinds of resources available to us, because when you start learning emotional intelligence, you start becoming more aware of who you are, aware of how things affect you, and emotional intelligence will help you find your voice. And so I think this may be one step that the church can take, is investing in that kind of training for its leaders.
Totally agree. I think one of the things that when you start talking about what does that look like in relationships, one of the questions that's been raised on the live is it your opinion that therapy is the only road to only is the sole road to accountability? Someone is sharing that when behavior doesn't change after being called out and counseling, the person refused to change, it's time to go.
Yes.
I think Reverend Delois nailed it. It is two things. When you're in a companionship, you can leave at first sight of problem. But a marriage, and I think when I do counseling, those that have ever been a part of my counseling, they tell you, I do about 8 to 9 sessions. One session, I just probe a whole lot of questions. And then I do all the building up before we say I do. But one of the things I always ask individuals, and I say at the end of these counsel sessions, my job as the counselor, as the therapist, is to turn you both inside out so your spouse can see exactly who you are before you go to this altar and make this covenant relationship with God, to God, with them. And once I've done that and they've said their pleasures, whether it's about family and faith and fidelity and frankness and finance, I just keep on going. And we worked that all out and we've talked about it and we discussed that. And you go to the altar and you say, yes, and I do. The person, you can't come back and then say, well, because you got these behaviors that I continue to keep showing up, I'm just gonna walk away. Not in marriage, because you've seen it. We've brought those things out. Now it is up to you to go back, and you talk about the gray matter and go and deal with that. But I just use a electronic analysis, talk about being short-circuited. It's the same thing. It's the idea that now we must go through and try to repair that. That's part of my job as a husband. If I was married to a wife who was doing things repeatedly after I know, like you said, it's not new behavior. So I see it, I know it, I understand it. But as a husband, now it's my job to go into her and help her through sickness, because that's a sickness, and in hell. Like, let's unpack all of that when you're talking about from a covenant space. It's not just, oh, now just run away because I'm tired of you dealing the same way. No, we have a different responsibility in the covenant side than I have in companion side. And I think now that doesn't mean it may not that it does not mean it's going to not still end in divorce. Because what I found out is that oftentimes most divorces mean that you pushed a companion relationship to covenant, and it was never intended to be. Right? Remember the scripture. The text says, what the Lord put together, let no man pull asunder.
We cannot quote scripture here, Pastor Russell.
I'm Black church.
I understand that you got your black shirt on and I got the elephant in the room, and Delois is the businesswoman tonight. But let's give the audience some solutions. Let's give the audience some solutions so we can laugh and close out. I love this. Thank you guys. So let's give some solutions. We've poured out every problem. We've grappled through the tension in the text. We've grappled through the Black church situations. I've never been married, and I appreciate the insight, and I listened closely to what both of you guys said, coming from a pastoral premarital counselor as a pastor, and from someone who's been married. Yes, you are correct, Pastor Russell. you have to find your voice. You have to affirm who you are. You have to say a lot of days, I'm proud of me and I can stand up for myself. It sounds a little weak for men, but you can use it too, because as we say, this is both coins, because we have one male and the moderator, and we have a female who's answering candid questions. Put your words of affirmation all over your home. For me, my friend gave me this little box of scriptures, and now that I understand scripture, I really cherry pick the ones that I put around the house that are going to make sense and be relatable to everyone. But I have words at my desk where I work, and I have scriptures on my mirrors in my bathroom to affirm who I am in God. Say to yourself daily, if you are getting sucked in by blackmailer behavior, resist them by saying to yourself, I can stand it. In a marriage, only in a marriage, say I can stand it 10 times, because what you guys have shared with me, you're supposed to work through the covenant relationship after, if you went through premarital counseling. However, if you are in a physical abusive situation, I can ask you to leave immediately. I'm not aware of what happens in an abusive relationship and what makes it so hard. A lot of my good friends say, when you go into your classes, because I've made the decision to get the license in therapy to finish to complete again another master's degree, but this time in therapy. What would my specialty be? It would not be domestic violence, because of something personal in my life, not that happened to me, but what happened to something that someone I had to bury. So if you're in an abusive relationship, get some help, seek help, because emotional blackmailers are not only verbally abusive, they're physically abusive too. Susan didn't tell us that Jim put his hands on Helen. He didn't tell us if the guy who manipulated that woman to stay at that business and stay in relationship with him and ended up finding her, put his hands on her. Observe their behavior. Watch what they're doing. Keep in mind, it's not about you. That's their problem. That's something that they have to deal with. I say a lot, even in my family, when we have confrontations, what you brought to me has nothing to do with me, so we will not use the guilt game. Let's talk about it. Let's sit down and have the courageous discussion. A lot of times, and just because we did talk about the Black church, you used to have town hall meetings and never get anything resolved. Let's have a real town hall meeting, and let's talk about how roles need to shift so we can get the emotional blackmailers out and put some healthy thinkers in so the Black church can grow. Now, can you do that in a family? Yes, you can put somebody in place to be an executor over your family rights in order to make things work in a healthy way, and you know that they're a trusted individual. So you can switch roles easily with that. Keep in mind that the emotional blackmailer uses a tone, but we too can have a tone. Helen can say, no, you can't, we can stay in relationship, but you won't be moving here. And if you choose to leave, let that be your choice. If Jim was on the opposite end of that, Jim can say to Helen, I understand that you love me and things are going on in your life, but I don't think that right now is a good time for us to move in with each other. You have to use your words. And one thing about Black people, because this woman is not a woman of color, we don't know how to use our words. We don't know how to talk things out. We just want things to feel better. Would you rather want to talk something out and use your emotional intelligence than to feel better for the moment, knowing that this behavior is going to happen all over again? Tell them what you want for them to change. And if in a marriage, if you have to go to marital counseling for 3 years, if you want to stay in that relationship to make it work, continue to go, continue to evolve through that counselor that you sought out. But one thing that I say about once you're married, please go see a professional therapist. somebody who is licensed. I am a pastoral counselor. What that means is I'm not a pastor, but I've taken the proper classes to counsel clients for half of the fee of a therapist because I've done the workings of a DSM 5 book. I've done the workings of what block thinking and round thinking looks like. And I understand when my clients sit in the chair, that time we have to manage the core. And it's up to the client to want to do the work. We have to begin to want to do the work by being direct in what we need to say. Black people, Black people, we have to use our voices. If we don't use our voices and our words, we'll continue to be 20 years behind the margin. Our relationships will continue to suffer, or we'll continue to stay longer than we needed to. Use your words in blackmail situations. Use your words when you see manipulation going forward. Don't just let it fall to the floor. Pull your brother or your sister to the side and say, hey, I didn't like how you did that. Let's sit down and talk about it. And if it dissolves the relationship was never meant to contain itself and stay within on one accord. So, since I've given you guys a few solutions, you can go back and do a replay. This went longer than I wanted it to, but I kind of felt that when we got together a few days ago because it was so it weaved in now so easily, and I knew that the conversations would just kind of be like, oh, we could just really be open with what we needed to say. So I'm not going to be the last voice that you hear. What I am going to say is you guys have a good evening. And I want Pastor Russell to tell us a little bit what he got from this. And then Delois, because she used this on her platform for her Facebook page because my internet was not acting up. So I'm going to give her the power and the opportunity to close us out because she was nice enough to use her Facebook page. And we're going to work on this internet over here. So what y'all going to know is when I make platforms, it's going to be just like we at home because there's a time and a season to be professional. And there's a time and a season to just, kind of make other people feel comfortable. Because when you start talking about psychology of the mind and you start talking about mental health professionals, the Black community gets a little leery. So you got to make it warm for them. And you can't use cliches. You got to let them know that, I grapple with this. So let's figure out how we can fix that. Because if we can't be real with ourselves, how are we going to be real with everybody else? So Pastor Russell, we're going to give you the floor, not no whole 30-minute sermon, but we're going to give you the floor to talk about what you get from this and what can you give people outside of what Suzanne can give those that deal with
Can I go first and we let Pastor close us out?
That's fine if that's how you want to do it. I was trying to
Oh, I certainly appreciate the gesture.
Okay.
So what did I get out of this and what can we offer? For myself, just some introspection and looking back at previous relationships and just analyzing those now to see if there was any emotional blackmail involved in those relationships. And, if I was the blackmailer or the blackmailee, just food for thought there. And then as far as what we can offer, what I can offer to others, the solutions that you gave, I think were very, very pertinent. I would say what I said earlier, of course, an emotional intelligence. With the pandemic, a lot of schools are offering free courses. You can just go online, Google class on emotional intelligence. If you are in need of a therapist, if you are a Black woman in need of a therapist, therapyforblackgirls.com. You can go to that website. They have a resource there where you can put in your location and you can, it'll pull up a list of therapists that are in your area. And, don't be fooled. You can have Jesus and a therapist. It took me some time to realize that because, in the Black church tradition, we were taught otherwise, and really not to talk about your mental health issues. But now more than ever, in these times of unrest, in this time of social injustice, police brutality, this coronavirus that there is no cure for, now more than ever, you need to protect your emotional and your mental health like never before.
I will say what I've learned as we've engaged in conversations that emotional blackmailing takes place in all sectors of our lives, whether that's church, whether it's personal, whether it's professional. So so with that being the case, I think we have to learn how to be aware, become aware of when someone is doing that to us, or when we are the offender and we become the person that's creating the emotional blackmailing. I would say that having a keen sense of who you are and what you desire, and in creating a principle understanding about how you desire to be treated needs to be in place before as you engage in all these spaces that relationships are taking place. And I think as we know those things for ourselves personally, we create those principles and standards and places of excellence in our own mind, that we say, this is who I am, this is what I'm going, this is what I expect, and this is what I want. And I think it'll be easy to identify somebody who's is emotionally blackmailing you, and you can be able to sever that relationship early versus allowing it to become a new trauma in your life. We all will have some trauma because that's life. Human beings are abrasive one to another different times. And so whether that's from childhood trauma, teenage, college years trauma, early adult years, whatever it is, we're going to endure some trauma. It's just making sure we're not so bruised and dented and distorted that we don't perpetuate that onto somebody else. And so we got to become responsible in how we live in relationship with each other, that we don't become abusers to other people, that we don't injure other folks along the way.
That's good.
Reverend, you got something to say, Yvonne? Come on, you last.
I'm good. I mean, I was letting you finish it out, and then we could just close out. But I want to thank everybody who joined. I'll go back and read the questions if I can find um, expert information, even from my own knowledge of what I've learned over the years of learning psychology. I will share, even with my own working of myself, because I believe that this is more so like a group therapy session. Something that I know that the Black community has never attended was a group therapy session. What happens is the moderator shares just as well as the group. They are as transparent as the group is. So I'm introducing something new to the Black community and to the Black church to help us all heal from the inside out. Because I said it prior to Reverend Delois, if we can't keep it real with ourselves, we can't keep it real with anybody else. Thank you guys for streaming in to Real Talk Real Life, Emotional Blackmail, sponsored by Single Moms Inspired for Life Extreme. You guys have a great night and enjoy the rest of your week. Bye-bye.
Great.